We're going to bring in my colleague Evan Dyer in Ottawa. So Evan, let's start about how extensive this package is. $82 billion. Can you break down some of what the government is doing for families and also individuals?
Absolutely, Hannah. So to take the big picture, first of all, this $82 billion is approximately $27 billion in government grants going direct to households and businesses, and $55 billion, or about twice as much, in deferred tax collection. So the government is going to hold off basically on collecting income taxes, push everything back by about 6 months to allow that money to continue to circulate in the Canadian economy, but eventually will hope to recover that $55 billion. The $27 billion, on the other hand, it seems is just going to be pushed out the door, and that will appear in Canada's deficit at the end of the year. But most economists agree that this is a necessary measure. To put it in terms of the Canadian population, you could say there's almost about $3,000 here per Canadian adult. So it's somewhat similar to the measures we saw announced in the United States today in terms of magnitude. Let's break it down, first of all, by what's available for families and individuals. So we just heard the Prime Minister describing the emergency care benefit, which is for people who are sick or in quarantine. He began to describe the emergency support benefit, which is for people who lose jobs or suffer reduced hours as a result of this virus. The Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, expanded on that a little bit later. So let's listen to him describing the emergency support benefit.
For any worker who loses their job and does not qualify for employment insurance, we'll be introducing a new benefit, the emergency support benefit, for which we've set aside $5 billion. More details will come in the near future, but you can rest assured that the federal government will provide you with 14 weeks of support at a comparable level to the employment insurance program.
So if we could just bring up a board here, let's look at these two programs that exist for people who don't qualify for EI. And it must be said that if people are looking, do have EI qualification, do meet the eligibility criteria, there are also some changes there. So for example, you no longer need a medical certificate to get sickness benefits through EI, and there won't be a 1-week waiting period. But if you don't qualify and you are either sick or in quarantine yourself, taking care of a family member who is, or are a parent of a child who's been sent home from school and therefore can't work, you can get this emergency care benefit, which is $450 a week for up to 15 weeks. And that is expected to cost about $10 billion to the Treasury. Let's look at the emergency support benefit. The emergency support benefit, also for people who don't qualify for EI, is to cover them for job losses or loss of hours, including self-employed people. And this is expected to cost about $5 billion. Both of these payments will become available, we expect, through direct deposit, and we're looking for the applications to open in April. It's expected to all be online, and it looks like it's going to be fairly streamlined. Some more measures that we can look at if we could bring up a new board. There is a GST credit. Now this is targeted at 12 million households who get the GST credit already because they're low or middle income households, but it's going to be topped up. So essentially they're going to get a one-time payment in May of $400 for singles and $600 for couples. This is going to cost the Treasury about $5.5 billion. There's also a Canada Child Benefit top-up, and this will go to about 3.5 million families. This increases the maximum by $300 per child. So a family with 2 children could see an extra $600 in May. Again, we believe a one-time direct deposit. This will cost just under $2 billion to the Treasury. So this is how we're getting towards that $27 billion figure. And just if I could mention 2 more things for young people, students, student loan interest holiday of 6 months. You will not have to pay interest on your student loan. And one thing that we still have some doubts about, because it involves private banks rather than the government, is mortgage deferral. The Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, said that he had discussed this with banks and that they've shown a willingness to defer collection of mortgage payments for up to 6 months, but we don't know a lot about eligibility criteria and other details on that one. Still waiting to hear more on that one.
Trying to get more information on that. Appreciate that, Evan. But talk about the tax measures too.
Okay, so that really is the bigger one in dollar terms. $55 billion of individual income and business income taxes that won't be collected by the government until later in the year. So first of all, the filing deadline has been pushed back to June the 1st, but more importantly, the payment deadline has been pushed back even further, another 3 months. Let's listen to Bill Morneau describing this measure.
Canadians who owe personal income taxes Canadian businesses who owe corporate income tax now only need to pay it before September 1st. This frees up $55 billion in temporary tax relief, and it keeps that money circulating in our economy. Given the extraordinary times, we've extended the tax filing deadline until June 1st.
So this is obviously a measure to keep liquidity in the economy. Rather than taking that $55 billion out of the economy and putting it in the Treasury, it's going to be allowed to continue to circulate and generate economic activity. Two more measures I should mention, which are aimed specifically at businesses and at preserving jobs. $10 billion is going to be made available in credits through the Business Development Bank of Canada and Export Development Canada for businesses that need loans. That, of course, will have to at some point be repaid. But what is not apparently going to have to be repaid is a salary subsidy. This is aimed at small and medium businesses that may have trouble meeting payroll. So there's going to be a 10% salary subsidy. Whatever the payroll of a business is, the government will chip in 10% as a subsidy, up to a maximum of $25,000 per business to help them meet payroll and not lay people off.
And then one of the other things today, Evan, was the Prime Minister and the President of the United States announced that the land border would be closed.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about those measures and when they're expected to be implemented?
It's looking like they're going to come into effect by the end of the week, perhaps Friday. This is something that both governments have been at pains to stress was a coordinated measure, a mutually agreed measure, apparently done with quite a bit of goodwill on both sides. That's the message that we've been hearing, both in Ottawa and in Washington, it must be said. You know, from President Trump himself, from his advisor Kellyanne Conway, who was at pains to stress that this is not a punitive measure. It also has more exemptions, it must be said, than the U.S. Bans on travel from Europe and China. So, for example, not only will trade continue, as is the case with Europe and China, but there are more exemptions for people who work in the United States but live in Canada, and vice versa will be able to continue to do so. There are compassionate exemptions for people who have sick family members on the other side of the border, and it appears that it really is just aimed at the more frivolous, under the circumstances, kind of travel. The example President Trump gave was crossing the border to go to a restaurant. So it's not a total shutdown. But it is something that means that most Canadians who travel for vacations and purposes like that will certainly not be able to go into the United States for a while.
Evan, thanks for breaking that all down for us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Hannah.